So Mother refused to make any illustrations for this canto. She said, I have been there, I have seen all this. I don't want to make pictures and imprint this on people's consciousness. So in this passage we are reading just now about the pilgrim on the Eternal's road, the dangers that await, and how people can just get overpowered. Then what happens? The self of life yields up its instruments to titan and demoniac agencies that aggrandize earth nature and disframe. A cowled fifth columnist is now thought's guide. His subtle defeatist murmur slays the faith, and lodged in the breast or whispering from outside, a lying inspiration, fell and dark, a new order substitutes for the divine. A silence falls upon the spirit's heights. From the veiled sanctuary, the God retires. Empty and cold is the chamber of the bride. The golden nimbus now is seen no more. No longer burns the white spiritual ray, and hushed forever is the secret voice. Then, by the angel of the vigil tower, a name is struck from the recording book. A flame that sang in heaven sinks quenched and mute. In ruin ends the epic of a soul. This is the tragedy of the inner death, when forfeited is the divine element, and only a mind and body live to die. Perhaps we'll look at this passage first, starting with line 169. Dana, would you begin?
The self of life yields up its influence to titan and demoniac agencies that apprentice earth nature and displace. The cowed fifth columnist is now God's guide. His subtle defeatist moment slays the faith, and lodged in the breast or whispering from outside. A lying inspiration fell in dark. A new order substitutes for the divine. A silence falls upon the spirit's heights. From the veiled sanctuary, the God retires. Empty and cold is the chamber of the bride. The golden nimbus now is seen no more. no longer burns the white spiritual flame, and hushed forever is the secret voice. Then by the angel of the Vijut tower, a name is struck from the recording book. The flame that sang in heaven sings quenched and mute. In ruin ends the epic of her soul. This is the tragedy of the inner death, when forfeited is the divine element, and only the mind and body live to die.
The life self has various different instruments, the instruments of the senses, the emotions. If the self of life of an individual surrenders its instruments to superhuman, hostile agencies, he says, to Titan and demoniac agencies. Titan, gigantic, superhuman, and demoniac, adverse forces, agencies and powers. So when that happens in that individual, the earth nature gets aggrandizes. Aggrandize, it means exaggerated, made bigger than it should be, and disframe it. They twist the framework of the nature. And what happens then, he says, is a cowled fifth columnist becomes the guide of thought. This phrase, a fifth columnist, I think it comes from the fascist regimes of the 1930s.
What is it?
The fascist regimes, the dictatorships of the 1930s, when they said that anybody who isn't for us, who isn't with us, he's a secret enemy. He doesn't belong to the acknowledged armies and columns. He's a fifth columnist. People can't see him or identify him, but he's acting for the enemy. So that's what's happening. That the thought begins to be guided by a hostile force. And that hostile force, the way that he works, that the fifth columnist works, is he tells the people, you can't win. The other forces are so much stronger than you are. Better just surrender or stay out of it. It's a defeatist murmur. So the people no longer believe that they can triumph or they can overcome. That defeatist murmur, maybe it gets lodged in the breast, in the heart, or it whispers from outside. But the result is that a wrong inspiration, a false inspiration, a lying inspiration, fell, terrible and dark, substitutes a new order in the nature of that being or those beings for the divine order. So the result is that a silence falls upon the spirit's heights. No more guidance comes from above. From the veiled sanctuary, the inner secret place where the Lord resides, he withdraws from there. the chamber of the bride where our psychic being lives. She's not there anymore. It becomes empty and cold. There used to be a wonderful halo of golden light. Now it's seen no more. The white ray, the pure white ray from above, is not burning. We don't see it. And the secret voice, the voice of the divine guiding us, is hushed forever. So when that happens, it's really terrible what he says. You know, there's an angel, a divine being, always keeping watch from his tall vigil tower, always on watch. Keep seeing what is happening with all the souls. He sees that, oh, I have to put a line through this name in the recording book. That soul is no longer active. Each soul is maybe represented by a beautiful flame of aspiration that's singing, making such a beautiful sound as it burns in heaven. But when the being has turned in the wrong direction, then that flame is put out. It doesn't sing anymore. The epic of a human soul ends in ruin. It's finished. This is the tragedy of the inner death. It's much more of a tragedy than any outer death. The inner death, when the divine element in a being is forfeited, is lost. What is left? Only a mind and body live, and they will soon die. The psychic being can really leave. No, it leaves just a mind and body.
Is it the fault of the human being, or how it happens?
Somehow what it's saying is that if we yield, if the human being somehow surrenders to these adverse influences, then it can happen. I think somebody has once asked Mother about Hitler, and she said, oh, he was such a weak fellow. He couldn't withstand these hostile agencies. And long before he left his body, the soul had left. No? So how can this happen? That gets described in the next passage. Yes. And there you explain the word columnist. A fifth columnist, yes. So I think it was from perhaps Franco's dictatorship in Spain. There were different columns fighting. And there were those who were for and there were those who were against. And some of them, I mean, I think Franco has coined this term of a fifth columnist. They belonged to another column, which we don't know about. They're acting in secret, but they're acting against the government in this case. No? So the way that they do it is they're not fighting. They're not out on the streets, they're not resisting, anything like that. What they're doing is they are spreading fear and despondency so that people don't have the courage to go out and oppose what is wrong. So that's why he says cowled. He's got the people who act in secret, we don't see them. And the army may have columns, but this is a secret column that we don't know about. And the way they are doing it is they are undermining all the positive forces.
Column is a rule, or?
It is, no, it would be a unit of the army.
Okay. I know the word.
Yeah.
Fifth column, but not columnist. So,
so you're one who belongs to that column, that secret column, a columnist. We also use this word columnist of somebody who writes in the newspaper. No, that's his profession. He writes columns in the newspaper. But this is a special use of which applies to politics. Yeah.
You want the origin? You want the origin of it?
Oh, if you have... Yes.
The term dates from the Spanish Civil War, when General Mola, leading 4 columns of troops towards Madrid, declared that he had a 5th column inside the city.
Inside the city, yeah. And they were discouraging. They say, you can't resist, you can't resist. Yeah. You'll have to surrender. Yeah. Thank you, John. So let's go on. You like to read? Would you like to read? Yes? Please start at the break on page 225. Page 225.
For terrible agencies the Spirit allows, and there are subtle and enormous powers that shield themselves with the covering ignorance of offspring of the gods, agents of the shadowy force, haters of light, intolerant of peace, aching to the thought, the shining friend and guide, opposing in the heart the eternal will. They veil the occult, uplifting harmonies. His wisdom's oracles are made our bones. The doors of God they have locked with the keys of creed, and shut out by the law His tireless grace.
Thank you. So none of this could happen unless the Spirit allows it. But the Spirit doesn't actually do all this. It allows these subtle and enormous powers that shield themselves, they hide themselves, protect themselves with the covering ignorance. We don't know they are there, so we don't defend ourselves against them. No? These subtle and enormous powers are offspring, children of the gulfs, the deep, dark, lower levels of nature. They are agents of the shadowy force, that hostile force that veils itself in shadows. These subtle and enormous powers hate light, the truth light. They hate it. They are intolerant of peace. They enjoy misrule. But what they do is they ape. They are aping to the thought, the shining friend and guide. Aping is what monkeys do. They copy you. Copying, imitating to the thought, the shining friend and guide, the inner divinity. Those subtle and enormous powers They oppose the eternal will. They oppose it in the heart. They veil, they cover up the occult, uplifting harmonist. In our being, there's a harmonist, somebody who keeps harmony, maintains or creates harmony, and lifts us up. But they hide that influence, that beautiful influence. That harmonist, he maybe speaks in an oracular way, his wisdom, and they twist it. They make the words of that harmonist into bonds, imprisoning us. The doors of God, they have locked with keys of creed. These powers tell you what you have to believe. And they shut out by the law the tireless grace of the Lord Himself. Is it clear? Anybody would like to ask anything? Tera.
Along all nature's lines, they have set their posts and intercept the caravans of light. Wherever the gods act, they intervene. A yoke is laid upon the walls deep high. Masked are its beasts from the supernal bliss, and the closed peripheries of brilliant mind block the fine entries of celestial fire.
Yes. So there are these roads of nature, this line and that line. These dreadful powers have set up their bases there along all the roads of nature. And they use those bases to intercept the caravans of light. Caravans, groups of people traveling, moving forward, perhaps on a pilgrimage, but perhaps on some voyage of exploration or trade. Those powers intercept them, they interrupt them. Wherever the gods act, those powers, they intervene, they interfere. If they see the light growing, they do their best to disrupt it. So in this way, the world's dim heart gets enslaved. A yoke is laid upon the world's dim heart. It doesn't its beats are masked, it is disguised. It isn't able to feel the supreme bliss. And there's this instrument of life, the mind, brilliant mind. It's so clever, it can play such tricks. But it's closed, it's limiting, It blocks the fine entries of celestial fire, the divine intuition, the divine illumination. Kamla.
All the dark adventures seem to be natural, the divinities institutes, turn into defeats the victories of truth, proclaim as falsehood the eternal laws, and load the dice of doom with bizarre life. The world's shrines they have occupied, absurd,
usurped
its thrones, its corns of the dwindling chants of the gods. They claim creation as their conquered
fief,
and crown themselves the iron lords of time. Adepts of the illusion and the mask, the artificers of nature's fall and pain, have built their altars of triumphant night in the clay temple of terrestrial life.
Right. So this is how it seems if we look, especially in times when our world, or in areas where our world is dominated by the powers of falsehood. No? Always those dark adventurers, they seem to win. It's as if the divine powers have little power against them. They fill the whole of nature with evil's institutes. Even the victories of truth, they turn them into defeats. The eternal laws, they proclaim as falsehoods. They say, no, that is not true. And they load the dice of doom with wizard lies. Loading the dice. If we read in Ramayana and Mahabharata, we will know that the sport of kings, it was to gamble with dice. So the dice, those pieces, they were ivory pieces that they played with, they shouldn't be loaded. It should be pure chance, the way that the dice fall. But if you're a cheater, you will find a way to load the dice. So that's what they do. They load the dice of doom. Those dice have been prepared by the powers of disaster. They load them with wizard lies, clever magical lies. These dark adventurers. They've occupied the world's shrines, all the sacred places. They have usurped its thrones. Usurping happens when somebody displaces the true ruler and takes his place. He's a usurper. So whoever should be ruling has been sent away. Somebody else is sitting there. And they think that they've already won everything. They mock the dwindling chances of the gods. When something's dwindling, it's getting smaller and smaller and weaker. So those powers are claiming creation that they have conquered it completely, a conquered fief. It's ruled by them. A fief, it's a territory that you rule. Those powers crown themselves the iron lords of time. These are adepts, these are clever people, even initiates. They are clever at illusion and the mask, disguise. And they are artificers. They do things that are not natural, but artificial. They artificially produce the fall and pain of nature, which is meant to be full of bliss. Those adepts have built their altars of triumphant night in the clay temple of terrestrial life. clay temple is our body.
And the interventions of the gods are not helping.
Not helping, no. Joel.
In the vacant precincts of the sacred fire, in front of the
Reredos,
in the mystic rite, facing the dim firmament none can pierce, intones his sovereign in the mitred priest, invoking their dreadful presence in his breast, attributing to them the awful name. He chants the syllables of the magic text and summons the unseen communion's act, while twists the incense and the muttered prayer, all the fierce bay with which the world is racked, is mixed in the foaming chalice of man's heart and poured to them like sacramental wine.
This is a terrifying image of the Black Mass, the sacred ceremony which has been turned inside out, totally perverted. So it's a picture of what the priest would do in a church. So there's a space where the sacred fire should be burning, but it's vacant, it's empty, it's not there. The reredos is a kind of screen, a carved screen that separates the part of the church where the people sit and the part where the priest can go and offer the sacrament. So in front of the reredos, that means on the people's side, he faces this dim velamen, this barrier that nobody can pass through. This priest, he's wearing a hat like a bishop, a mitre. It's a special pointed hat that shows that he's a high official of the church. He's chanting his solemn hymn. But what he's doing is invoking the dreadful presence of those powers, those hostile powers, to enter into him. He gives to those powers the name, the sacred name that we should all only speak and think of with awe, with reverence and worship. He chants the syllables of the magic text. In the Black Mass, I think they even chant it all backwards. He summons, he calls for the act of communion when the priest communicates with the divine presence. And while he's doing that, between the incense on one side, the muttered prayer on the other side, all the fierce bale, the terrible misfortune which is torturing the world, is mixed in the foaming chalice of man's heart. It's as if the priest is using the human heart as the place to create this poisonous substitute for the sacramental wine. poured to them, to those...
What is chalice?
A chalice, it's the sacred cup where the wine of the sacrament is kept.
The word bale?
Bale, it means disaster, misfortune. Or somebody can give you a baleful look. They wish you all kinds of ill. Bale. It's the opposite of good and light.
To them,
Yes, to them, I'm just looking. It is these powers, of course, these subtle and enormous powers. They are the ones to whom the sacrifice is made. Alice.
What line?
233. Assuming.
Names divine, they guide and rule. Opponents of the highest, they have come out of their world of soulless thought, power, to serve by enmity the cosmic scheme. Night is their refuge, strategic base. Against the sword of flame, luminous eye, bastion they live, an acid force of gloom, calm and secure, sunless presence. No wandering ray of heaven can enter there. Armored, protected by their lethal masks, as in a studio of creative death, giant sons of darkness sit and plan the drama of the earth, their tragic stage. All who would raise the fallen world must come under the dangerous arches of their power. For even the radiant children of the gods, to darken their privilege, is that dreadful right. None can reach heaven who is not passed through heaven.
So these powers have actually come into our world deliberately as opponents of the highest, of the supreme. They have come out of their world of falsehood, their world of soulless thought and power. They've come to serve by enmity the cosmic scheme. They are opposing it. They're doing everything they can to oppose it. But strangely enough, they can't help in their own way serving it. But they keep themselves hidden. Night is their refuge, their strategic base. That's where they base themselves. They protect themselves. Bastion, surrounded by strong walls, they live in these massive forts of gloom, of darkness. They're protected against the divine sword of flame, the luminous eye of the Supreme. They feel calm and secure in their forts of sunless privacy. Nobody can get them there. No wandering ray of heaven can enter there. Those powers are armored, protected by their lethal masks, their masks which have the power to kill. And they are sitting there and plotting, as in a studio of creative death, a studio where designers meet and work out designs. These giant sons of darkness sit and plan the drama of the earth. They make the earth their tragic stage. All beings who want to help uplift the fallen earth have to pass through underneath the dangerous arches of their power, these giant sons of darkness. Because they've been granted the privilege that they're allowed to darken, to cast their shadow even on the radiant children of the gods. That's their right, their dreadful right. They've been given, they've been granted that power. None can reach heaven who has not passed through hell. Yes.
Look like real.
Oh, yes. Even to the mother it has happened, yes. Rani, would you read?
I think I'm going to pass. I didn't bring my reading glasses.
Okay. Alexander.
This too, the traveler of the woods on there, a warrior in the dateless news strife. He entered into dark despairing night, challenging the darkness with his luminous sword. Alarming with his steps, the threshold moved. He came into a fierce and dolorous realm, peopled by souls who never had tasted peace. Ignorant, like men born blind, who know not light. They could equate worse deal with highest good. Virtue was to their eyes a faceless sin, and evil a misery, and misery were their natural state. A dire administration's fatal curve, making of grief and pain the common law, decreeing universal joylessness, had changed life into a stoic sacrament, and torture into a daily festival.
Yes, let's pause there. So all these terrible things that we've already read about in this earlier parts of this canto, also this passing through hell, no? This too the traveler of the worlds must dare. This is King Āsvapati. He's the one who is traveling through all the worlds and realms and planes of existence. As part of his quest, he's looking for something. And here at the end of this canto, he will find what he was looking for. But at the moment, he's deep down in these darkest depths. In order to find that key to nature's change, he too has to pass through all these terrible ordeals. He's a warrior in the dateless duel's strife, in the contest, in the battle that's going on without any date to it, no beginning and no end. It goes on and on and on. He's going down deeper and deeper. He entered into dumb, despairing night, challenging the darkness with his luminous soul. So his steps are even alarming the darkness, alarming with his steps the threshold gloom. The threshold is, that lintel in a door. You have to step over it to enter into the house, the threshold. So it's a threshold of gloom, of darkness. His daring in stepping over that threshold is alarming for those who live within. He comes into a fierce and dolorous realm, a world of violence and sorrow and pain. And that world is peopled. The people who are living there, or the beings who are living there, are souls who never had tasted bliss. They are ignorant, like men born blind, who don't know what light is. So because of that ignorance, they can't tell the difference between the worst and the best. They could equate, they could make the worst falsehood and evil equal with the highest good. They can confuse virtue and sin, and evil and misery was the natural state of those beings. In that realm, there's the rule, a kind of rule of law, a penal code. And we have in our world, we have penal codes which tells what are the crimes and what are the punishments. No? This realm is administered by a dire, a terrible administration, which makes grief and pain just the common law that everybody has to experience. Under that rule, there has to be universal joylessness. Joy is not allowed. I don't know, perhaps some of you have read the famous book by George Orwell called 1984. It describes a world like this. Particularly the administrators of that world, they don't want anybody to experience the slightest happiness, because that is a threat then to their rule. So what they have done, they've changed the life of that realm into a stoic sacrament, just to go on living. The only thing you can do is endure.
Like the communist world, no? Communist also, there are so many laws and rules.
Yes. And they have turned torture into a daily festival, extreme suffering. I think that's where we'll stop today. It goes on. 1, 2, 3, 4. On page 231, King 𝒔𝒊𝒇𝒆 finds the key he was looking for. So we still have a couple more weeks to go before we reach that. Anybody would like to ask anything?
The book, what book you mentioned? The French book, 1984?
This book, it's a famous book written in the 1940s by an English writer. His pseudonym was George Orwell. It's called 1984. Perhaps he was writing in 1944. And he describes a world, a totalitarian, a world in which the great powers have all conspired together to create a world like this that's ruled by totalitarian dictators. Everybody is spied on. In everybody's room there's something like a television, but it's looking at you. It's filming everything that you do. So there's nothing like freedom there. And it's with an amazing insight that the author has understood the mechanisms of this kind of rule. He was thinking in political terms, not spiritual terms, but we can recognize the mechanisms. I'm not recommending you, young lady, I'm not recommending you to read that book. We'll stop there for today. Thanks to Sri Aurobindo. The self of life yields up its instruments to titan and demoniac agencies that aggrandize earth nature and disframe. A cowled fifth columnist is now thought's guide. His subtle defeatist murmur slays the faith, and lodged in the breast, or whispering from outside, a lying inspiration fell and dark, a new order substitutes for the divine. A silence falls upon the spirit's heights. From the veiled sanctuary the god retires. Empty and cold is the chamber of the bride. The golden nimbus now is seen no more. No longer burns the white spiritual ray, and hushed forever is the secret voice. Then by the angel of the vigil tower, a name is struck from the recording book. A flame that sang in heaven sinks quenched and mute. In ruin ends the epic of a soul. This is the tragedy of the inner death, when forfeited is the divine element, and only a mind and body live to die. For terrible agencies the Spirit allows, and there are subtle and enormous powers that shield themselves with the covering ignorance. Offspring of the gulfs, agents of the shadowy force, haters of light, intolerant of peace, aping to the thought the shining friend and guide, opposing in the heart the eternal will. They veil the occult uplifting harmonist. His wisdom's oracles are made our bonds. The doors of God they have locked with keys of creed, and shut out by the law his tireless grace. Along all nature's lines they have set their posts, and intercept the caravans of light. Wherever the gods act, they intervene. A yoke is laid upon the world's dim heart. Masked are its beats from the supernal bliss, and the closed peripheries of brilliant mind block the fine entries of celestial fire. Always the dark adventurers seem to win. Nature they fill with evil's institutes, turn into defeats the victories of truth, proclaim as falsehoods the eternal laws, and load the dice of doom with wizard lies. The world's shrines they have occupied, usurped its thrones. In scorn of the dwindling chances of the gods, they claim creation as their conquered fief, and crown themselves the iron lords of time. Adepts of the illusion and the mask, the artificers of nature's fall and pain, have built their altars of triumphant night in the clay temple of terrestrial life. In the vacant precincts of the sacred fire, in front of the reredos, in the mystic rite, facing the dim velamen none can pierce, intones his solemn hymn the mitred priest, invoking their dreadful presence in his breast. Attributing to them the awful name, he chants the syllables of the magic text, and summons the unseen communion's act, while twixt the incense and the muttered prayer, all the fierce bale with which the world is racked is mixed in the foaming chalice of man's heart, and poured to them like sacramental wine. Assuming names divine, they guide and rule. Opponents of the highest, they have come out of their world of soulless thought and power, to serve by enmity the cosmic scheme. Night is their refuge and strategic base. Against the sword of flame, the luminous eye, bastioned they live in massive forts of gloom. Calm and secure in sunless privacy, no wandering ray of heaven can enter there. Armored, protected by their lethal masks, as in a studio of creative death, the giant sons of darkness sit and plan the drama of the earth, their tragic stage. All who would raise the fallen world must come under the dangerous arches of their power. For even the radiant children of the gods to darken their privilege is, and dreadful right. None can reach heaven who has not passed through hell. This too the traveller of the worlds must dare. A warrior in the dateless duel's strife, he entered into dumb, despairing night, challenging the darkness with his luminous soul. Alarming with his steps the threshold gloom, he came into a fierce and dolorous realm, peopled by souls who never had tasted bliss. Ignorant, like men born blind who know not light, they could equate worst ill with highest good. Virtue was to their eyes a face of sin, and evil and misery were their natural state. A dire administration's penal code, making of grief and pain the common law, decreeing universal joylessness, had changed life into a stoic sacrament and torture into a daily festival.